Grace Bellamy was 34 years old, a cardiology resident, and a single mother to 3-year-old twins. 2 months ago, she lay bleeding in an emergency room after a car accident, her hands trembling as she dialed her parents' number. She needed someone to watch Emma and Owen for just a few hours while doctors tried to save her life. What she received instead was a text message in the family group chat that read, "You've always been a nuisance and a burden. We have concert tickets with Adrienne tonight. Figure it out yourself." From her hospital bed, Grace called an emergency nanny service, paid triple the rate, and made a decision that would change everything. She cut them off completely. The monthly mortgage payments, the health insurance, the car repairs, everything she had been quietly funding for 8 years. 2 weeks later, there was a knock on her door that would force the truth into the light. Growing up in the Bellamy household, Grace learned early that love came with a ranking system. Her older sister Adrienne, 3 years her senior, was the star. Effortlessly beautiful with magnetic charm, she made their parents light up whenever she entered a room. When Adrienne announced she wanted to pursue fashion design, their mother cried happy tears while their father called her his little visionary. When Grace said she wanted to become a doctor, her father simply nodded and said, "That's practical." The word stung, but Grace buried herself in textbooks, aced every exam, and clawed her way into one of the top medical schools in the country. 4 years of undergraduate work, 4 years of medical school, 3 years of residency specializing in cardiology. The day she graduated from medical school should have been one of the proudest moments of her life, but her parents arrived 2 hours late. "Sorry, sweetheart," Patricia said without meeting her eyes. Adrienne had an emergency meeting with a potential investor. "We had to drop her off first." There were no flowers, no celebration dinner, just a quick photo in the parking lot before her parents rushed off because Adrienne needed emotional support after her meeting. Grace compared this to Adrienne's first fashion show 3 years earlier, when the whole family flew to New York, stayed in a 5-star hotel, and sat front row. Her father posted 17 photos on social media with captions like "So proud of our talented girl." Grace got a parking lot photo and a lukewarm congratulations. She told herself it made sense. Fashion was competitive, Adrienne needed more support, medicine was stable, and she could handle things on her own. What Grace didn't know then was that her parents' favoritism wasn't just emotional. It was financial, and she was the one footing the bill. The pattern had been invisible to her for so long that when she finally saw it clearly, the weight of it nearly crushed her. It started 8 years ago, right after Grace finished medical school and began her residency. Kenneth called one evening, his voice tight with embarrassment. "Grace, we're in a bit of a bind. The mortgage payment is due and things are tight this month. Could you help us out? Just this once." Grace transferred $2,400 that night without hesitation. They were her parents, and of course she would help. But just this once became every month. The mortgage, then their health insurance premiums at $800 monthly when Kenneth's company dropped their coverage, then the emergencies, car repairs, a roof leak, a new furnace. Grace never said no, not once. She kept a detailed spreadsheet, though she didn't know why. Perhaps some part of her needed to see it in black and white. Over 8 years, the amount reached $364,000. She never asked for gratitude or expected recognition, but she also never expected to be called a burden by the people she had been carrying for nearly a decade. When Grace became pregnant with the twins and their father walked out during her 5th month, she called her parents from the hospital after a frightening bleeding episode. Terrified and alone, she desperately needed support. "Oh, honey, we wish we could come," Patricia said gently, "but Adrienne is so stressed after her show in Milan. She really needs us right now." They didn't come, not for the birth, not for the first month when Grace barely slept, nursing 2 newborns while studying for her board exams. Grace told herself it was temporary, that everyone was doing their best. What she didn't admit was how invisible she felt, how deeply it hurt to always be the one expected to endure without complaint. The accident happened on a Tuesday evening. Grace was driving home after a 16-hour shift, her eyes heavy but her mind alert enough. The light turned green and she pulled into the intersection. She never saw the truck that ran the red light at 50 miles per hour. The impact hit her driver's side door with devastating force. Glass exploded, metal screamed, and the world spun before going black. She woke in an ambulance with searing pain through her abdomen. A familiar face hovered above her, Dr. James Brennan, an emergency physician at her hospital. They had worked together for 2 years. "Grace, can you hear me?" His voice was calm but urgent. "You were in an accident. We're taking you in now."
Possible internal bleeding.
You're going to need surgery. The word surgery hit her like a second collision. My kids, she gasped, grabbing his arm. Emma and Owen are with the babysitter. She leaves at 8.
James checked his watch.
It's 7:15. Grace had 4 to 5 minutes to find someone to watch her children while doctors cut her open. Grace fumbled for her phone with shaking hands, blood smearing across the screen as she pulled up her parents' number.
It rang 4 times.
Grace, Kenneth's voice was impatient.
We're about to leave.
What is it? The words tumbled out between gasps of pain.
Dad, I need help. I was in an accident.
I'm being taken to the hospital for surgery. Please, I need you and Mom to watch the twins for a few hours. Silence followed, then muffled voices, Patricia sharp and irritated, Adrienne laughing in the background.
The line went dead.
A moment later, Grace's phone buzzed with a message in the family group chat. Patricia had written, "You've always been a nuisance and a burden. We have concert tickets with Adrienne tonight. Figure it out yourself." A second message appeared from Kenneth. "You work in hospitals every day. You'll be fine. Don't make this bigger than it is." Adrienne followed with a laughing emoji.
James was watching her.
Grace didn't realize he could see her screen until he spoke. "Grace, what did they say?"
She couldn't answer.
Something had cracked open inside her, and it wasn't just the internal bleeding.
"I need a phone," she whispered.
"Mine's dying."
He handed her his without question.
Grace searched for emergency nanny services, found one with 24-hour availability, and explained the situation in clipped professional sentences. Yes, she would pay triple the rate. Yes, she would provide the babysitter's contact information for handoff instructions. Yes, she authorized immediate payment.
The entire process took 4 minutes.
When she handed back his phone, James was still watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read.
"Can you screenshot those messages?" she asked. "From my phone before it dies." He nodded slowly and did so.
Grace closed her eyes as the ambulance pulled into the hospital bay. The pain was overwhelming, but it wasn't coming from her abdomen anymore. From that hospital bed, with fear and clarity warring inside her, Grace made the easiest decision of her life.
The surgery took 4 hours.
Her spleen had ruptured, causing severe internal bleeding. Another few minutes and she might not have made it. Grace spent 5 days in the hospital with 4 drips, morphine to manage the pain, and nurses checking her vitals every few hours. Not one call came from her parents, not one text, not one visit. The emergency nanny service was expensive but worth every penny. They coordinated with her regular sitter, kept Emma and Owen safe and fed, and sent daily photo updates. Strangers took better care of her situation than her own family. On the 3rd day, Grace asked the nurse for her laptop. "Are you sure you're up for it?" the nurse asked. "You should be resting." Grace's hands were steady as she logged into her banking app and cancelled every automatic transfer, 8 years of payments ending with a few clicks. Then she opened her phone settings and blocked Kenneth's number, Patricia's, and Adrienne's. There was no dramatic moment, no tears, no second-guessing. It felt like setting down a weight she had carried so long she had forgotten it was there.
James stopped by later that afternoon.
He had checked on Grace every day, bringing coffee and quiet company.
"How are you feeling?" he asked.
Grace looked up at him and, for the first time in years, told the truth.
"Better.
For the first time in 8 years, I actually feel better."
He didn't push for details but simply nodded as if he understood. Grace knew the fallout was coming.
Her parents would notice the missing money, and they would demand explanations. What she didn't expect was who would arrive at her door 2 weeks later. It was a Saturday morning when Grace was finally home, moving slowly but alive. She was making pancakes for Emma and Owen, their favorite weekend treat. The kitchen smelled like butter and maple syrup while Owen tried to stack toy blocks and Emma knocked them down. Then came 3 sharp knocks on her front door. Grace's heart rate spiked as she looked through the peephole. Standing on her doorstep was a tall man in his mid-70s with silver hair, sharp blue eyes, and the posture that still carried the authority of 40 years on the federal bench. It was Grandfather William. "Before I continue, I need to ask you for a favor. We're working toward our first 1,000 subscribers, and your support truly makes a difference. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment where you're watching from. That single click helps keep this channel growing and allows me to keep bringing you stories like this." Grace hadn't seen him in almost 3 years. Her parents always had excuses for why they couldn't visit: too busy, too far, too inconvenient.
She opened the door and he pulled her into a hug so tight it made her surgical incision ache.
Grace. His voice was rough with emotion. Let me look at you. He pulled back, his eyes scanning her face before dropping to where her hand rested protectively over her abdomen.
I know everything, he said quietly.
Margaret told me. Aunt Margaret was Patricia's younger sister, the only person in the family who had ever openly questioned how Grace's parents treated her.
Grandfather, I don't, he held up a hand.
You don't need to explain anything, but I do need you to come somewhere with me. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, cream-colored, elegant, formal. An invitation to his 75th birthday party the following Saturday. The whole family will be there, he said, his eyes meeting hers with steel beneath the warmth. And I have some things that need to be said. Grandfather Williams sat at Grace's kitchen table, watching Emma and Owen with a soft smile. They had taken to him immediately, showing off their toys and demanding his attention. They look just like you did at that age, he said.
Same stubborn chin. Grace set down 2 cups of coffee and took the seat across from him.
Grandfather, how did you find out about the accident?
About everything. Margaret called him the night it happened. She'd heard through one of your cousins. When she told me what Kenneth and Patricia did. He stopped, his jaw tightening.
I've watched this for years, Grace.
The way they treat you versus Adrienne.
I'm old, but I'm not blind. Grace stared at her coffee, her voice small. I thought maybe I was imagining it, making it bigger than it was.
His response was firm.
You weren't. I was a federal judge for 4 decades. I know how to read people, what favoritism looks like, what exploitation looks like.
He leaned forward. Tell me something.
Do you still have records of the money you sent them?
Grace nodded slowly. Every transfer. 8 years' worth. His expression hardened with purpose. Good. I want you to put together a summary.
Every payment, every date, every amount. At my birthday party, in front of the entire family, the truth is going to come out. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. Grace printed every bank statement, every transfer confirmation, 8 years of financial records organized chronologically and bound in a plain folder.
Looking at it all together was staggering.
Month after month, year after year, a river of money flowing in one direction with nothing coming back. Aunt Margaret came over 3 days before the party. She was 55, sharp-tongued, and had always been the family's black sheep for refusing to pretend everything was fine. She flipped through the folder, her expression darkening with each page. $364,000, she said flatly. Grace, do you understand what this is? This is more than most people make in 7 years of full-time work, and they called you a burden.
Grace pressed her palms against the kitchen counter. I don't want to destroy the family.
I just want them to see, to acknowledge what I've done.
Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. You're not destroying anything. You're just stopping the lie.
They built their comfortable life on your silence. You're not obligated to keep giving them that. Grace nodded, though anxiety churned in her stomach.
What if everyone takes their side? Margaret shrugged. Some might. Family is complicated.
But your grandfather has influence, and more importantly, you have the truth. That evening, Grace received a text from Cousin Jenna, someone she barely spoke to.
Heard you and your parents had a falling out.
Adrienne's been telling everyone you've been acting erratic since your accident. Just wanted to give you a heads up.
Grace stared at the message.
They were already spinning the narrative, painting her as unstable, preparing their defense before she even arrived. She hadn't wanted a fight, but it seemed they were bringing one anyway. Grandfather Williams' house was a colonial estate on 3 acres of manicured land, white columns, wraparound porch, the kind of place that whispered old money and quiet authority. Grace pulled into the circular driveway with her hands tight on the steering wheel. Emma and Owen chatted in their car seats about the big house and the balloons they could see through the windows.
More than 40 cars lined the property.
The whole family was here. Grace wore a simple navy dress, professional and understated.
She wasn't here to make a scene but to tell the truth. The folder was in her bag.
Inside, the party was already in full swing with waiters circulating champagne and a string quartet playing in the corner. Crystal and silver glinted under chandelier light. Grace spotted her parents immediately near the fireplace. Kenneth wore his best suit, looking distinguished, while Patricia stood in a cream-colored dress, laughing at something someone said. They saw her at the same moment. Patricia's laugh died. Kenneth's face went rigid. For a long moment,
None of them moved. Then Adrienne appeared, gliding over in a designer dress that probably cost more than Grace's monthly student loan payment. Her smile was perfect, her eyes like ice. "Oh, Grace," she kissed her cheek. "You made it. We heard about your accident.
Nothing too serious, I hope."
Grace met her gaze steadily. "A ruptured spleen and internal bleeding. I almost died." Adrienne's smile flickered.
Mom said it was just a fender bender.
Grace shifted Owen to her other hip. "Mom wasn't there."
"None of you were." Adrienne's composure cracked for just a second before she recovered, patting Grace's arm with false sympathy.
"Well, you look fine now.
That's what matters." She drifted away, but Grace felt the first rumble of thunder.
This was only the beginning of what would unfold. The attack came 30 minutes into the party.
Grace was getting fruit punch for the twins when she heard Adrienne's voice, deliberately loud and carrying across the room. "I'm so worried about Grace, honestly." She was talking to a cluster of aunts and cousins near the dessert table. "The accident really affected her. She's been saying the strangest things, cut off all contact with Mom and Dad for no reason." Grace kept her back turned, but every word landed like a small knife.
Patricia joined in, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief.
"We've tried everything, calls, texts.
She won't respond."
"I think she's having some kind of breakdown."
Someone murmured sympathetically.
"She's always been the sensitive one," Adrienne added. "Remember how dramatic she was as a teenager? I think the stress of being a single mom has been too much." Grace felt pitying eyes on her and whispered concerns rippling through the room. She said nothing, just handed Owen his juice cup and smoothed Emma's hair. Aunt Margaret appeared at her side, her voice low and furious. "They've been laying groundwork all week, calling relatives, planting seeds. They know something's coming and they are trying to discredit you first."
Grace looked across the room at her grandfather.
He was watching with an unreadable expression, a glass of whiskey in his hand.
He gave her the smallest nod. "I'm fine," Grace told Margaret. "Let them talk." The room quieted suddenly as someone clinked a glass. Grandfather William rose from his chair.
At 75, he still commanded attention like the courtroom judge he had been for decades on the bench. Every eye in the room turned to him. "Before we continue with the festivities," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly, "I have a few things I'd like to say." The air changed, charged with anticipation. Before he could continue, Kenneth stepped forward. "Dad, wait." His voice was controlled, but tension showed in his jaw. "Before you say anything, there's something the family should know."
Grandfather William raised an eyebrow.
Kenneth turned to face the room, every inch the concerned parent. "As many of you may have heard, my daughter Grace has been going through a difficult time."
He gestured toward her with a sad smile.
"After her accident, she's been confused, distant. She's cut off contact with Patricia and me completely." Patricia stepped up beside him, still clutching her handkerchief. "We've only ever wanted the best for her, but she's been spreading terrible lies about us, saying we abandoned her, that we don't love her." The room fell silent with 40 pairs of eyes boring into Grace. "We've tried to be patient," Kenneth continued, "but it's been heartbreaking. We gave that girl everything." Adrienne added from across the room, "She's even been claiming we refused to help her during her accident, which is absolutely not true."
There must be some misunderstanding. Someone near Grace let out a sympathetic murmur. An aunt she barely knew approached her.
"Honey, is everything okay?
Your parents are so worried about you."
Grace stood frozen, Emma burying her face in her neck and sensing the tension. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Then Grandfather William's voice cut through the room like a gavel. "Are you finished, Kenneth?" The question was quiet, almost mild, but every person in that room heard the steel underneath. Kenneth's confident expression faltered. "I just thought the family should know," Grandfather William interrupted. "The family should know the truth, and I intend to give it to them." He walked to the center of the room, his gait measured and deliberate, the walk of a man who had presided over hundreds of cases and never once lost control of his courtroom. "I've listened to your concerns, Kenneth. Patricia, Adrienne, you've painted a very clear picture of a troubled young woman who's turned against her loving family." He paused, letting the words hang. "Now I'd like to ask some questions."
Kenneth shifted uncomfortably.
"Dad, I don't think this is the place." Grandfather William's voice didn't rise, but it hardened.
"This is exactly the place.
This is family, and families should know the truth about each other."
He turned to Kenneth. A simple question. Who has been paying the mortgage on your house for the past 8 years? The color drained from Kenneth's face. What? His voice was barely audible. Your mortgage. $2,400 a month for 8 years. Who's been paying it? Kenneth's eyes darted to Patricia. We pay our own mortgage. Grandfather William reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the folder. Do you? Because I have here a complete record of bank transfers from Grace's account to your mortgage company every month for 96 consecutive months. A murmur rippled through the room. That's a misunderstanding, Patricia stammered. Grace offered. We never asked. The grandfather's tone remained calm. I'm not suggesting you held a gun to her head. I'm simply establishing facts. He opened the folder. Let me share some numbers with the family. I think they'll find them illuminating. Across the room, Adrienne had gone pale. Kenneth's hands were clenched at his sides. Patricia looked like she might faint. And Grace stood holding her children, her heart pounding as the truth finally began to surface. 8 years. Grandfather William read from the folder. The room was utterly silent. Let's break it down. Mortgage payments, $230,400. That's the house Kenneth and Patricia live in, the house they claim they pay for themselves. Someone gasped audibly. Health insurance premiums, $76,800. When Kenneth's company dropped their coverage, Grace picked up the bill. He flipped a page. Car repairs, home maintenance, emergency expenses, approximately $4,000 to $5,000. Another page. Cash gifts and financial support for Adrienne's fashion ventures, $12,000. He closed the folder. Total, $364,200. The silence was deafening. Aunt Margaret stepped forward. For context, everyone, that's more than most people make in 7 years of full-time work. Grace did this while completing her medical residency and raising infant twins alone. Patricia's voice cracked. She offered. We never forced her. Grandfather William's response was measured. No one said you forced her, but I'm curious. In 8 years of receiving this support, how many times did you say thank you? No answer came. How many times did you visit her in the hospital after her twins were born? Still nothing. How many times did you show up for her? Patricia started crying, not delicate, sympathetic tears, but real, ugly sobs. Kenneth's voice was hollow. We thought she was fine. She never complained. She always managed. Grandfather William repeated the words with quiet intensity. She managed because she had to. Because you taught her that her needs didn't matter. An uncle near the back shook his head. $364,000, and you called her a burden. Kenneth flinched as if struck. There's one more thing the family should hear, Grandfather William said, pulling out his phone and adjusting his reading glasses. 2 months ago, Grace was in a car accident. She was bleeding internally and being rushed to emergency surgery. From the ambulance, she called her parents. Her children were home with a babysitter who was about to leave. She needed someone to watch them for a few hours. He paused, looking directly at Patricia and Kenneth. This is the text message she received in response. I'll read it exactly. You've always been a nuisance and a burden. We have concert tickets with Adrienne tonight. Figure it out yourself. The room erupted with gasps and exclamations. That's not, you're taking it out of context, Adrienne said desperately. Aunt Margaret's voice cut through the chaos. There is no context that makes abandoning your daughter during a medical emergency acceptable. Kenneth shouted, we didn't know it was serious. Grandfather William's question silenced him. Did you ask? Did you call her back? Did you come to the hospital? The answer was silence. Grandfather William addressed the room. I'm not asking anyone to pass judgment. I'm simply presenting facts. What you do with them is your own choice. He looked at Grace finally, his eyes soft. Grace, is there anything you'd like to say? Grace hadn't planned to speak. She had expected her grandfather to handle everything while she stood silently vindicated. But looking around at her crying mother, her shell-shocked father, her sister's crumbling facade, she realized she had something to say. She handed Owen to Aunt Margaret and stepped forward. I didn't come here for revenge. Her voice was steadier than she expected. I came because grandfather invited me, and because for 34 years I've been living with a version of my family that wasn't real. A version where I was the strong one, the reliable one, the one who didn't need anything. She looked at her parents.
I believed you when you said Adrienne needed more support because her industry was harder, that I could handle things on my own.
I tried to be what you needed me to be. A tear slid down her cheek.
But that night in the ambulance, bleeding and terrified, I finally understood. I wasn't strong to you. I was convenient. I wasn't reliable. I was exploitable. And no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough to make you see me the way you see her.
Several family members had moved closer to Grace. An aunt touched her arm. A cousin nodded with tears in his eyes.
I don't hate you, Grace said quietly to her parents.
But I can't keep pretending this is okay.
I can't keep buying love that should have been free.
An uncle turned to Kenneth, his voice filled with disgust. How could you, Kenneth?
Living off your daughter while treating her like nothing.
Kenneth's voice was desperate. So what now? You've humiliated us in front of the whole family.
Are you happy?
Grace shook her head slowly. I'm not happy, Dad.
But I'm also not sorry, because this isn't about humiliation.
It's about honesty.
For the first time in 8 years, our family knows the truth, not your version, not Adrienne's spin. The truth.
She took Owen back from Aunt Margaret.
From now on, I won't be sending money. Not because I can't afford it, but because financial support should be a gift, not an obligation, and it should flow both ways in a family that actually cares about each other. I'm also not cutting you off forever, but I need space, real space. If someday you can acknowledge what you've done, really acknowledge it, maybe we can rebuild something.
But I won't hold my breath.
Grace walked toward the door with her children. The weight finally lifted. Behind her, the room remained silent except for Patricia's sobs. Grace didn't look back. For the first time in her life, she was choosing herself, and that was enough. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found value in Grace's journey, please consider sharing this video with someone who might need to hear it.
Thank you for watching.
Take care of yourself. You deserve it.